She was only 16. Smart, kind, and always careful. But one message on a dating app changed everything. Miranda Corsette vanished without a trace, no witnesses, no leads. Her phone went silent, and the digital trail she left behind led investigators into a dark and disturbing world. What they discovered would shock her family, the community, and the entire country. This is the case that exposed the hidden dangers of online predators, and the heartbreaking story of a girl who just wanted someone to talk to. What really happened to Miranda Corsette, and could it happen again? The sun had barely set over the small town of Gulfport, Florida, when the world around 16-year-old Miranda Corsette quietly began to unravel. It was February 15, 2025, a Friday. Cool winds skimmed over the Gulf, brushing through suburban streets lit dimly by porch lights and headlights. Gulfport was the kind of place where people left doors unlocked, where neighbors exchanged smiles at the mailbox, and where trouble seemed like something that happened elsewhere. But that evening, something went terribly wrong. Miranda Corsette never returned home. To the casual observer, Miranda's life seemed typical of a teenager balancing early motherhood with high school and family life. But beneath the surface, she carried the weight of adult responsibilities and emotional isolation. She had dreams, big ones, for her son, for herself. But she also carried wounds invisible to the public eye. And in the digital spaces she retreated to for comfort, someone was waiting. At first, her disappearance didn't spark immediate panic. Teenagers, especially those under stress, often take brief refuge away from home. The initial hours passed with concern, but not alarm. Her grandmother, who had raised her after family difficulties and had recently taken on the care of Miranda's baby, assumed she was with friends or needed time alone. By the next morning, that assumption shattered. Her phone went silent. Her social media accounts, once active with posts and messages, were suddenly dormant. There were no texts. No calls. Not even a login. By Sunday, a missing person report was filed. Investigators would later uncover a dark truth: Miranda had been lured by an adult predator she met through a dating app. Her innocence and search for connection were manipulated and weaponized against her. She didn't simply vanish, she was silenced. Erased. Hidden by those who thought they could destroy evidence and bury consequences. What followed was a story that stunned Florida and spread far beyond the region. News outlets scrambled to piece together what happened to a vibrant young girl with a bright future and a baby boy who would never know his mother. Her community, once quietly nestled in comfort, erupted in grief, anger, and calls for justice. But Miranda Corsette's story isn't just about a crime. It's about systemic failure, digital platforms that overlooked red flags, a society slow to act on online exploitation, and a predator emboldened by loopholes and neglect. It's about grief, resilience, and a family's battle to turn their pain into purpose. This narrative delves into every detail: who Miranda was, the man who ended her life, the accomplice who helped hide it, and the investigators who fought to uncover the truth. It explores the gaps in digital safety and the broader societal consequences of ignoring the vulnerabilities of youth online. And most importantly, it tells the story of a girl who mattered. Long before she became the subject of headlines and vigils, Miranda Corsette was a daughter, a granddaughter, a young mother, and a girl who smiled more often than her life warranted. Born in 2008 in St. Petersburg, Florida, Miranda entered a world already weighted with complications. Her parents were young and struggled with substance abuse and instability, and by the time she was a toddler, Miranda was placed in the care of her maternal grandmother, Judith Corsette, a retired nurse who became her guardian and closest confidant. Judith, then in her late 50s, stepped up to provide the structure and affection Miranda so desperately needed. In their modest Gulfport home, she created a safe haven that balanced discipline and warmth. Even from an early age, Miranda stood out, not because she demanded attention, but because she observed the world with a quiet intensity. Teachers noticed her sharp mind and creativity. She excelled in English and had a natural talent for understanding people's emotions. She was one of those students who always looked out for the quiet kid in the room, one of her 8th grade teachers recalled. She had a kindness that wasn't performative. It was instinctive. But Miranda's teen years were complicated. At just 15, she gave birth to a baby boy. The pregnancy, unplanned and challenging, shifted the trajectory of her already tumultuous adolescence. There was no father in the picture, at least not one willing to step into the role. Her grandmother, though supportive, was aging and had limited resources. The two of them began raising the child together, improvising their way through each new challenge. Despite the exhaustion and pressure, Miranda remained enrolled in school. She attended Gulfport High part-time and had recently started an online GED program. Her goal? To become a licensed practical nurse. She always said she wanted to work in pediatrics because she understood what it meant to be scared and young, said one family friend. But life was not easy. Miranda struggled with feelings of isolation. Many of her peers couldn't relate to her situation, a teen with a child, managing adult responsibilities, while still navigating the emotional terrain of adolescence. She found limited support at school and increasingly sought companionship in digital spaces. It was through social media and dating apps that Miranda sought validation and distraction. With few real-world outlets, she began creating online profiles, some truthful, others more fabricated to appear older or more independent. These platforms became her escape. They were also her vulnerability. Unsupervised and emotionally exposed, Miranda was the perfect target for grooming. She was not naive, but she was hungry for attention, the kind that didn't come with judgment or exhaustion. As her online presence grew, so did her exposure to predatory figures who exploited platforms where age restrictions were loosely enforced and identity verification nearly non-existent. This was how she met Stephen Gress. At first, Gress presented himself as just another stranger interested in her posts, her photos, her voice. He paid attention. He asked questions. He complimented her not only on her looks but on her strength as a young mother. To Miranda, who was used to being overlooked or pitied, this felt like something close to affection. She didn't yet see the manipulation beneath the surface. Miranda's family had no idea about the escalating conversations. Her grandmother, while loving, wasn't digitally savvy and had no access to Miranda's accounts. The young girl had grown skilled at compartmentalizing her online and offline lives, something common among teens, but deadly in her case. As February 2025 began, Miranda grew increasingly secretive. She seemed distracted. She smiled more often at her phone. And though she never disclosed her plans, investigators would later discover that her conversations with Gress were growing more frequent and more emotionally charged. He knew her age. He knew her situation. And still, he persisted. In her final days, Miranda was making plans she never shared. She arranged a visit with Gress under the guise of a casual meetup. Perhaps she believed it would be harmless. Perhaps she thought she had control. But what she didn't know was that her trust would be used against her in the most horrifying way imaginable. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Miranda Corsette had increasingly retreated into the digital world. As a young mother with limited social life and an unstable family foundation, her smartphone became more than a device, it was her lifeline to a world where she could momentarily forget the weight she carried. She joined several online communities, including chat groups, social media pages, and dating apps. Most of these platforms required users to be 18 or older, but like many teenagers, Miranda had little difficulty bypassing those age restrictions. She created profiles under an assumed age and carefully curated pictures that made her look older than she was. It was a dangerous game, one played in the hopes of connection, not consequence. It was on one of these apps that she met Stephen Gress. Gress was a 35-year-old man living in St. Petersburg, about 30 minutes from Gulfport. He worked sporadically as a freelance handyman and shared a residence with a woman named Michelle Brandis, who would later play a dark role in the unfolding tragedy. Gress had no notable criminal history, but he did have a troubling digital footprint: chat histories with underage girls, flagged content on forums, and a pattern of predatory messaging that had gone largely unchecked by platform moderators. According to digital forensic reports, Miranda and Gress began messaging in late January 2025. The initial conversation started like many others: innocent, disarming, even flirtatious. Gress presented himself as laid-back and non-judgmental. He didn't ask probing questions at first; instead, he listened. He responded quickly. He complimented her maturity and told her she seemed older than 16. Miranda didn't correct him, she confirmed it. But Gress wasn't deceived. Investigators would later uncover that he had accessed photos where Miranda referenced her age, schoolwork, and even her son. Gress knew the truth, and yet, rather than withdraw, he intensified the relationship. He offered Miranda something she lacked: consistent attention and emotional validation. He asked about her day. He praised her strength as a mother. He made her feel seen. The grooming was not overt, it was gradual, calculated. Gress crafted himself as a sanctuary, a man who understood what Miranda was going through. For a teenage girl seeking emotional anchoring, it was intoxicating. By early February, their messaging escalated. They exchanged phone numbers. Gress began sending videos, some were benign, others more suggestive. Miranda replied with selfies, brief voice messages, and emojis. To her, it may have felt like a crush. To him, it was preparation. On February 10th, Gress suggested they meet in person. Miranda hesitated at first. She had responsibilities: her son, her schoolwork, and her grandmother's watchful eye. But Gress persisted. He framed the visit as just hanging out, insisting that he wasn't expecting anything inappropriate. He even promised to drive her back home. Miranda agreed, but set the meeting for February 15th, when she knew her grandmother would be busy running errands. That Friday, she left home under vague pretenses. She didn't tell her grandmother where she was going or who she was seeing. The last known footage of her was captured by a doorbell camera near Gress's residence around 3:47 p.m. Miranda can be seen stepping out of a rideshare car, holding her phone, and walking up to the door. She never came back. Inside the home, according to later statements, Miranda was initially welcomed by both Gress and his roommate Michelle Brandis. The atmosphere was casual. Brandis offered her a soda. The trio sat in the living room for a short while. But at some point, the dynamic shifted. Gress confronted Miranda, accusing her of stealing a ring. Whether the accusation was genuine or fabricated remains unclear. What is known is that this confrontation turned violent. Brandis would later claim she heard a struggle. Gress, she said, used a billiard ball wrapped in plastic and suffocated Miranda. The attack was sudden and brutal. And Michelle, rather than calling 911 or intervening, stood by. Later, she helped Gress clean up the crime scene and dispose of Miranda's remains. Miranda's phone was destroyed. Her identification was burned. Gress and Brandis dismembered her body in the bathroom, carefully placing the remains in garbage bags, which they later transported to a municipal dumpster in Hillsborough County. The area serviced a waste incineration facility, an intentional move to destroy all physical evidence. They believed the fire would erase her. But digital footprints don't burn so easily. Within 48 hours, Miranda's family would report her missing. And soon, investigators would begin tracing the virtual breadcrumbs that Gress, so confident in his deception, had failed to sweep away. What transpired inside the modest single-story house on 49th Street South in St. Petersburg was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a chilling orchestration of control, cruelty, and calculated concealment. Once Miranda Corsette stepped through the doorway that February afternoon, she unknowingly entered the last place she would ever see. Though the full truth of what occurred in those final moments remains known only to those who witnessed it, what has been pieced together from police interviews, forensic evidence, and confession transcripts paints a disturbing portrait. February 15, 2025 3:47 p.m. Miranda arrived at the residence, greeted by Stephen Gress and his roommate, 36-year-old Michelle Brandis. The atmosphere, according to Brandis, was calm at first. Miranda was offered something to drink. She appeared relaxed, possibly reassured by Brandis' presence. She had no reason to suspect that anything sinister was about to unfold. At some point, the tone changed. Gress accused Miranda of stealing a ring, an accusation later deemed baseless. Whether this confrontation was a pretext or the result of a personal spiral remains uncertain. What followed was a sudden escalation, a physical assault. Gress allegedly struck Miranda in the head with a hard object wrapped in plastic, a pool ball, investigators believe, then smothered her until she was motionless. Brandis told detectives that she witnessed the entire ordeal. Yet instead of calling for help, she stood silent. In her statement, she claimed fear. Fear of Gress. Fear of reprisal. But prosecutors would later argue her role was far more than passive. The aftermath, dismemberment and disposal. What happened in the following hours was methodical. Using tools from their home, Gress and Brandis transported Miranda's body to the bathtub, where they dismembered her remains. They worked quickly and without hesitation. Garbage bags were filled. Blood was scrubbed from walls, floors, and drains. Miranda's phone and identification were destroyed, burned in a small backyard pit behind the house. The crime scene was treated with bleach and ammonia. The pair reportedly avoided making noise, drawing curtains and waiting until nightfall before beginning the disposal. February 16, 2025 early morning hours. Brandis and Gress loaded the garbage bags into a vehicle and drove nearly 25 miles to Hillsborough County, deliberately choosing a dumpster that fed into a local waste incinerator. They believed it was the perfect cover, no body, no evidence, no case. But their confidence was premature. Back at the home, inconsistencies emerged. A neighbor recalled hearing unusual banging sounds and water running at odd hours. A rideshare driver, reviewing their trip logs after seeing Miranda's face in the news, remembered dropping her off and noted the man who greeted her at the door didn't seem like someone she knew well. Miranda hadn't smiled or waved. February 17, 2025. Miranda's grandmother filed a missing person report after 48 hours of silence, an uncharacteristic absence that alarmed her deeply. She would never go this long without checking on her baby, Judith told officers. Something is wrong. Detectives began canvassing her online history and quickly discovered digital trails leading to her conversation with Gress. Chat records revealed flirtatious messages, a planned meetup, and even screenshots suggesting Miranda had shared her location with a friend, who would later come forward with critical details. February 19, 2025. Authorities visited the home of Stephen Gress. He was cooperative but evasive, claiming he didn't know anyone named Miranda and hadn't hosted visitors in weeks. The story didn't hold. A search warrant was secured based on digital evidence, and what officers discovered turned the case. Traces of blood were found in the bathtub, behind tile seams, and on the underside of the sink. Luminol revealed cleaned but residual blood spatter. The drains had been scrubbed with a chemical solvent, but a few strands of long brown hair were recovered, DNA later confirmed to match Miranda. Gress was arrested on suspicion of murder. Brandis, brought in for questioning separately, initially denied everything. But under pressure, and after forensic teams uncovered a key piece of surveillance footage showing her helping Gress carry garbage bags to the car, she broke here. Her statement would serve as the backbone of the prosecution's timeline. What transpired inside the modest single-story house on 49th Street South in St. Petersburg was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a chilling orchestration of control, cruelty, and calculated concealment. Once Miranda Corsette stepped through the doorway that February afternoon, she unknowingly entered the last place she would ever see. Though the full truth of what occurred in those final moments remains known only to those who witnessed it, what has been pieced together from police interviews, forensic evidence, and confession transcripts paints a disturbing portrait. February 15, 2025, 3:47 p.m. Miranda arrived at the residence, greeted by Stephen Gress and his roommate, 36-year-old Michelle Brandis. The atmosphere, according to Brandis, was calm at first. Miranda was offered something to drink. She appeared relaxed, possibly reassured by Brandis' presence. She had no reason to suspect that anything sinister was about to unfold. At some point, the tone changed. Gress accused Miranda of stealing a ring, an accusation later deemed baseless. Whether this confrontation was a pretext or the result of a personal spiral remains uncertain. A physical assault. Gress allegedly struck Miranda in the head with a hard object wrapped in plastic, a pool ball, investigators believe, then smothered her until she was motionless. Brandis told detectives that she witnessed the entire ordeal. Yet instead of calling for help, she stood silent. In her statement, she claimed fear. Fear of Gress. Fear of reprisal. But prosecutors would later argue her role was far more than passive. What happened in the following hours was methodical. Using tools from their home, Gress and Brandis transported Miranda's body to the bathtub, where they dismembered her remains. They worked quickly and without hesitation. Garbage bags were filled. Blood was scrubbed from walls, floors, and drains. Miranda's phone and identification were destroyed, burned in a small backyard pit behind the house. The crime scene was treated with bleach and ammonia. The pair reportedly avoided making noise, drawing curtains and waiting until nightfall before beginning the disposal. February 16, 2025, early morning hours. Brandis and Gress loaded the garbage bags into a vehicle and drove nearly 25 miles to Hillsborough County, deliberately choosing a dumpster that fed into a local waste incinerator. They believed it was the perfect cover: no body, no evidence, no case. But their confidence was premature. Back at the home, inconsistencies emerged. A neighbor recalled hearing unusual banging sounds and water running at odd hours. A rideshare driver, reviewing their trip logs after seeing Miranda's face in the news, remembered dropping her off and noted the man who greeted her at the door didn't seem like someone she knew well. Miranda hadn't smiled or waved. February 17, 2025. Miranda's grandmother filed a missing person report after 48 hours of silence, an uncharacteristic absence that alarmed her deeply. She would never go this long without checking on her baby, Judith told officers. Something is wrong. Detectives began canvassing her online history and quickly discovered digital trails leading to her conversation with Gress. Chat records revealed flirtatious messages, a planned meetup, and even screenshots suggesting Miranda had shared her location with a friend, who would later come forward with critical details. February 19, 2025. Authorities visited the home of Stephen Gress. He was cooperative but evasive, claiming he didn't know anyone named Miranda and hadn't hosted visitors in weeks. The story didn't hold. A search warrant was secured based on digital evidence, and what officers discovered turned the case. Traces of blood were found in the bathtub, behind tile seams, and on the underside of the sink. Luminol revealed cleaned but residual blood spatter. The drains had been scrubbed with a chemical solvent, but a few strands of long brown hair were recovered. DNA later confirmed to match Miranda. Gress was arrested on suspicion of murder. Brandis, brought in for questioning separately, initially denied everything. But under pressure, and after forensic teams uncovered a key piece of surveillance footage showing her helping Gress carry garbage bags to the car, she broke. Her statement would serve as the backbone of the prosecution's timeline. When 16-year-old Miranda Corsette was reported missing on February 17, 2025, by her grandmother, the initial response from local authorities was procedural, even routine. Teenagers, especially those in difficult domestic situations, were often thought to have run away. But Gulfport police quickly realized this was different. Miranda had left behind her infant son, a fact that weighed heavily on detectives. "No teenage girl just walks away from her child without warning," said one officer familiar with the case. There was something about this that felt off from the start. The investigation began by analyzing Miranda's digital footprint. February 18, 2025. Detectives secured access to Miranda's cloud accounts, phone records, and chat apps. Within hours, they discovered her ongoing communication with a man named Stephen Gress. The messages revealed a rapidly intensifying online relationship. Gress had invited Miranda to meet in person. She had agreed. And then, radio silence. Authorities subpoenaed data from the dating app and social platforms where Miranda and Gress had interacted. The chat logs painted a disturbing picture. Gress not only knew Miranda's real age, but had also initiated the meetup despite that knowledge. Screenshots showed him confirming her arrival details, time of meetup, and vague reassurances that she would be safe with him. One critical piece of evidence emerged from Miranda's own foresight: she had shared her live location with a classmate via Snapchat. The pin led directly to the home of Stephen Gress on 49th Street South. February 19, 2025, 11:20 a.m. Detectives arrived at Gress's residence. He answered the door with calm composure and claimed not to know Miranda. Brandis, too, denied knowing anything about a girl matching her description. But inconsistencies in their accounts raised suspicion. More importantly, the digital trail contradicted their claims. By the afternoon, a search warrant was issued. February 20, 2025. Forensic investigators entered the property. The initial visual sweep found nothing alarming. But the chemical analysis told a different story. Luminol revealed faint but widespread traces of blood in the bathroom, particularly around the tub and under the baseboards. A closer inspection uncovered long strands of hair consistent with Miranda's. In the backyard fire pit, investigators found partially melted plastic, scorched metal fragments, and what would later be identified as Miranda's necklace, badly burned but distinguishable by a family engraving. The team also retrieved pieces of a shattered smartphone and SIM card from the ashes. Investigators were now dealing with what they believed was not just a disappearance, but a homicide. Gress was detained for questioning that evening. He initially maintained his innocence, suggesting Miranda had never arrived. But under mounting pressure, he changed his account, claiming she had indeed visited, stayed briefly, and then left on her own. The police weren't convinced. Neither was the district attorney. February 21, 2025. As pressure mounted, Brandis was brought in for a second round of questioning. Detectives confronted her with surveillance footage showing her and Gress carrying multiple garbage bags from the house into a vehicle. The footage timestamp matched the period immediately after Miranda's last known contact. Faced with this evidence, Brandis broke. In a disturbing confession, she admitted that Miranda had been killed during an argument inside the home. Gress, she said, believed Miranda had stolen from him. In a fit of rage, he assaulted and smothered her. Afterward, they dismembered her body in the bathtub, stored the remains in bags, and drove them to a dumpster in Hillsborough County, which fed into a waste incinerator. The intention was clear: to eliminate all physical evidence. February 22 to 24, 2025. Multiple agencies, including the St. Petersburg Police Department, Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI, launched an urgent search for any remaining traces of Miranda's body. The dumpster location was identified, but by then, several tons of waste had already been burned. Authorities scoured the ash and surrounding landfill materials but found only partial bone fragments and charred tissue, later confirmed by DNA as belonging to Miranda. The horror of the discovery shocked even veteran investigators. What had begun as a routine missing persons report had now escalated into a full-blown homicide investigation involving grooming, premeditated murder, and a grisly attempt at body disposal. On March 3, 2025, Just over 2 weeks after Miranda Corsette was last seen, law enforcement formally arrested Stephen Gress and Michelle Brandis in connection with her disappearance and death. The arrests were the result of a multi-agency investigation involving the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, St. Petersburg Police, Gulfport Police, and forensic analysts working behind the scenes. The arrests followed hours of interrogations, during which both suspects provided incriminating statements. Gress confessed to his role in Miranda's death, stating that he suffocated her using a billiard ball and plastic wrap after accusing her of stealing a ring. He claimed that Brandis witnessed and assisted in efforts to hide the body. Michelle Brandis, initially more reluctant to speak, eventually admitted to helping Gress move and dismember the body. She also confirmed that the remains were discarded in a Hillsborough County dumpster, one known to feed waste directly into a municipal incinerator, a method clearly intended to destroy physical evidence. Based on these statements and corroborating forensic data, prosecutors moved quickly to press formal charges. First-degree murder. Abuse of a corpse. Tampering with physical evidence. Kidnapping of a minor. Contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Obstruction of justice. Due to the brutality of the crime and Miranda's age, the state attorney's office announced that they would pursue capital punishment. Gress became eligible for the death penalty under Florida law, which allows for such a sentence in cases involving minors and acts of extreme cruelty. Accessory to first-degree murder. Abuse of a corpse. Tampering with physical evidence. Failure to report a death. Obstruction of an ongoing investigation. While not the primary aggressor, Brandis's complicity and active role in covering up the murder meant she too faced severe felony charges, carrying potential life imprisonment. Both suspects were booked into the Pinellas County Jail without bond. Their mugshots were released to the media shortly after arrest. The images circulated widely, becoming symbols of a case that had already gripped public attention across Florida and beyond. In a press conference held on March 4, Sheriff Bob Galtieri of the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office addressed the public. He described the crime as one of the most disturbing and deliberately cruel homicides we've seen in years. He confirmed that the suspects had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks, but that digital forensics and human intelligence helped us find the truth. Despite having no body, prosecutors emphasized that a murder conviction without a recovered corpse is entirely possible. Especially with the strength of the confession, corroborating digital evidence, and forensic results from the crime scene. Meanwhile, community members gathered for a vigil in Gulfport, placing candles, photos, and handwritten notes for Miranda. Her grandmother, though devastated, attended and thanked the public for their support. She spoke briefly to the media, saying, "Miranda was more than just a victim. She was a mother, a daughter, a granddaughter. She had dreams, and she should still be here." Legal proceedings began swiftly, with both Gress and Brandis appearing for their first court hearing within 48 hours of arrest. Public defenders were assigned, and prosecutors began preparing for a grand jury indictment. The arrest brought a sense of closure to the search, but it also opened a new chapter of pain, accountability, and the slow pursuit of justice in the courtroom. Following the arrest of Stephen Gress and Michelle Brandis, the case entered the legal system with swift and decisive momentum. The state attorney's office for the 6th Judicial Circuit of Florida, based in Pinellas County, formally filed charges within days of their detention. The prosecution announced its intent to pursue the death penalty against Gress due to the heinous nature of the crime and the victim's status as a minor. The first court appearance took place on March 5, 2025, at the Pinellas County Criminal Justice Center. Both suspects appeared separately before Judge Elizabeth Harper. Gress was denied bond due to the capital nature of the charges and the extensive evidence presented. Brandis was also held without bond, though her defense team requested a separate hearing to argue for release based on her secondary role. Over the following weeks, the court scheduled a series of pretrial motions, including motions to preserve digital and forensic evidence, defense motions to suppress parts of the confessions, arguing coercion, requests from the prosecution for a grand jury indictment, which was officially returned on March 19, formally charging Gress with first-degree murder, among other offenses. Prosecutors disclosed a growing body of evidence during discovery, including phone records and GPS data tracking Miranda's movement, surveillance footage showing her arrival at Gress's residence, forensic evidence from inside the home, including DNA matches, digital conversations between Miranda and Gress in the days leading up to the murder, confessions and statements made during police interviews. With this evidence, the prosecution built a timeline of events demonstrating premeditation, prolonged abuse, and an attempt to destroy the body in order to evade justice. Public reaction and media coverage. Public reaction was immediate and emotional. The brutality of the crime, coupled with Miranda's age, triggered widespread media coverage and a flood of outrage on social media. Within a week of the arrests, national outlets including CNN, ABC News, and NBC had reported on the case. A petition demanding the maximum sentence for both suspects gained over 250,000 signatures in less than 10 days. The case also reignited conversations around teen safety on dating apps, digital grooming and exploitation, the need for better parental controls and monitoring tools, laws concerning disposal of human remains. Miranda's story was also picked up by advocacy groups focused on preventing violence against minors. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a statement calling the case a tragic reminder of the dangers vulnerable teens face when interacting with adults online. Family response and advocacy. Miranda's family, though devastated, became active voices in public discussions. Her grandmother, who had raised her and was caring for Miranda's infant son, spoke at a press conference outside the courthouse on March 12. Miranda had her whole life ahead of her. She was trying to be a good mother, to finish school, to grow. These people took everything from her. I want justice, not just for us, but for every young girl who might fall into the same danger. The family began organizing a foundation in Miranda's name aimed at raising awareness about online safety for minors and advocating for stricter verification and reporting mechanisms on dating apps. As of early April 2025, prosecutors were preparing for a full trial. The case was expected to move to jury selection by summer 2025, pending mental evaluations and pre-trial litigation from the defense. Legal analysts indicated that, while the lack of a body presents challenges, the strength of the confessions, timeline evidence, and corroborating forensic data makes this a strong case for the prosecution. The court also issued a gag order, limiting what attorneys and investigators could say to the media in order to preserve the fairness of the proceedings. What began as a missing person report had now grown into a high-profile capital case, one that would likely continue to shape local policy and national debate around online child safety for years to come. Miranda Corsette's case has sparked urgent discussions nationwide about online safety, particularly for minors using dating platforms. At just 16, Miranda was vulnerable, yet she was able to connect with a 35-year-old man, Stephen Gress, through a dating app without detection. Her tragic death highlighted a dangerous loophole in digital platforms where age verification and monitoring remain minimal or easily bypassed. Following public outcry, advocacy groups and lawmakers began calling for stricter regulations. Several Florida legislators introduced proposals to enforce mandatory identity verification on all adult dating apps and impose criminal liability for knowingly engaging with underage users. Law enforcement agencies also began retraining units on handling digital grooming cases, treating them with the same urgency as in-person predation. Miranda's story now serves as a case study in preventative failure, digital exploitation, and the consequences of inaction. While justice moves forward in court, Miranda's legacy is shaping conversations far beyond Florida, turning private tragedy into a catalyst for public reform.